going on in Mexico and Venezuela and Cuba and south of the border. These people are living in such desperation that they're willing to walk here or swim across the ocean to get here. And they're going to keep coming. So instead of trying to create this divisiveness, why not create a program where Americans can learn Spanish and make people feel welcome and at the same time help them learn English?
And the talent that you have, you know. So if you have a background in business and you have a background in languages, he brought that together the same way anybody else would do, right? If I have a background in auto mechanics and I also got a background in business, maybe I went to school or maybe I learned from my entrepreneur or apprenticeship, then bring that together and then you can do two things at one time.
This is back in 2001. I got on a plane and I moved to Spain. I did the Spanish immersion stuff. I came back from that trip. I really didn't have a great experience because I couldn't understand my teachers over there. They didn't speak any English and I didn't speak any Spanish.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Career Education Learning Center podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Rivers. I am honored and privileged to have on our show today, David Stevens. David is a devoted language teacher with a passion for bridging cultural divide through education. Moreover, he is also an entrepreneur, which he's going to tell us about being a teacherpreneur. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, with his Let's Start Talking program. How are you doing today, David?
All right. I'm doing great, Mitchell. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on our show. David, tell us a little bit about yourself and when did you find out that you had this love for languages?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, just to get started, my name is David El Profe, as my students so lovingly call me. I have been teaching languages on and off for a little over 20 years now.
Wow. You don't look that old.
I got started right after I graduated from high school. I found my why. When I was in high school, I wasn't a great Spanish student. It's actually funny because I hated Spanish when I was in high school. I kept asking myself, why? Why do I have to learn Spanish if I live here in the United States? And at that time, I didn't know anybody that spoke Spanish. I didn't live in a very diverse community, so I had no exposure to it. And I just dreaded going to my Spanish classes. But, you know, when I graduated from high school and I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I didn't go to college right away and I started working in construction. And so here in Colorado, let me tell you, the gringos aren't on the job site. I showed up that first day and I was the only American on the job site. Everybody was speaking Spanish and I was like, wow, I wish I had paid more attention in those Spanish classes. So this is back in 2001. I got on a plane and I moved to Spain. I did the Spanish immersion stuff. I came back from that trip. I really didn't have a great experience because I couldn't understand my teachers over there. They didn't speak any English and I didn't speak any Spanish. So it was a very uncomfortable experience, but I got a little bit out of it. And then I started enrolling. I enrolled in night classes. So I was working construction during the day and going to Spanish classes at night. And that's when I started getting a little bit of the language down. And at that time, one of my neighbors was from Mexico. He didn't speak any English, but we were out hanging out on the balcony one day and I saw him, you know, I looked over at him. I was like, hey man, you want to come have a beer with us? And he had that kind of blank look on his face. And I pointed at the beer and I said, cerveza. And he looked at me, he said, Simon. He came over and like just little by little. So I started teaching him how to speak English. He was helping me with my Spanish. And, you know, little by little, that's what I did. I ended up majoring in Spanish international business in college. And that took me back to living down in South America. I lived in Argentina, Chile, and Ecuador. I fell in love with Argentina. So I moved back there for about a year. I did a full semester abroad and lived there for a year. And when I came back from that, my college professors invited me to start tutoring Spanish at the university that I was going. too. And so that was like 2005, 2006 timeframe. I graduated. I went into the business world for a little bit at a startup software company, but I just decided that my true passion was in languages. So I started the language school here in Denver, Colorado back in 2012, and I've been doing it ever since.
Oh man, that is a fantastic story. And I like how you was willing to bridge that divide there, that language barrier there, how you willing to take the first step. And that's the thing that we as Americans need to do is take that first step. So in order to get somebody that's different than you, or whether it's culturally, whether it's food, or just way of life, it's good to go ahead and make that first step. You never know what can come about that, because then you learn different stuff. You learn different ways. And then you kind of realize they just like we are, right? A lot of times, like you said, you bring that cultural divide and you bring a commonality there to where you can enjoy each other's company and learn about one another. And so I love that. So how did you come to combine your entrepreneur with your Spanish background?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of, it's like you're saying, right? Somebody just needs to bridge that cultural divide. And I just saw that there was this huge gap in the educational space here. In Denver, there's a lot of immigration. Something like 30 to 40% of the city speaks Spanish natively, and it's only about 50% of the city that speaks English natively. You've got another handful of, 10, 20% of people that speak any number of languages like Vietnamese, Swahili, Mandarin, whatever the other language is, right? But I felt like there's this huge population of Spanish speakers, and they just weren't getting the attention that they needed or they deserved. All the schools are very similar. They work with really large group classes. They mix levels together. They don't really specialize on anybody. And just thinking from my business background, like business really makes sense when you specialize on something, right? So I just wanted to specialize on teaching English to Spanish speakers because I felt like that was the biggest challenge in terms of integration and cultural assimilation that I was just seeing in my neighborhood, in my city. You go out and about in the community and you can just see it, right? And then about that same time, not to really get into politics, but I started seeing this national conversation about immigration and wanting to deport people and kind of this divisiveness starting to spread. And I always thought, all of these challenges and problems, they just stem from cultural misunderstandings. And deporting people isn't going to fix the problem, right? Like once you understand what's going on in Mexico and Venezuela and Cuba and south of the border, these people are living in such desperation that they're willing to walk here or swim across the ocean to get here. And they're going to keep coming. So instead of trying to create this divisiveness, why not create a program where Americans can learn Spanish and make people feel welcome, and at the same time help them learn English, and then put them together, get them all in the same room, get everybody talking to each other? Because in my experience, I don't care what your race, your religion, your cultural background is. If we get together and sit down for a cup of coffee, we're going to be friends after that, right? So that was kind of my vision. And that's why I started the language school, is to get everybody together and just, create stronger and more resilient communities through communication and cultural understanding.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I'm all about diversity. If you watch my podcast, I try to have a diverse, as far as guests coming from different cultures, different countries, different areas, throughout for to go to big school, small school. It doesn't matter. I think diversity is great. I think you have to realize that we all are different, but then we all are the same. And no barriers that we may have, maybe language barriers, maybe cultural barriers as far as the way of life that we live, are no different than one another. It's just different. But when, like you said again, once we get together, have a cup of coffee and start talking to one another, and then if you can communicate with one another, that's even better. And so that's why I really wanted on our show today, David, is because I love how you bridging those cultures together, and that commonality together. And I just love the way you do that. And I kind of like the way you did, and I really like the way you did, bringing the business world, your business background with your language background and put them into one. And that's what I want to tell our students and audience is that utilize the resources that you have availability and the talent that you have, you know. So if you have a background in business and you have a background in languages, he brought that together the same way anybody else would do, right? If I have a background in auto mechanics and I also got a background in business, maybe I went to school or maybe I learned from my entrepreneur or apprenticeship, then bring that together and then you can do two things at one time. You're helping people and at the same time, you're able to make a comfortable living.
That's true.
Now, did you go to college? You said you went to college earlier. What college did you go to? And did that training help you for what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I went to Eckerd College, which is located in St. Petersburg, Florida. And I studied international business, Spanish, and marketing. And I think that was the perfect training to ultimately start a language school. I started my career at a startup software company. And it never really felt 100% comfortable to me. You know, it never really felt like it was my thing. I worked there for a few years. I got a lot of really good experience. I learned how to do sales. I learned how to do marketing and stuff like that. But what I really had this passion for was culture, language, and bringing people together. So that's also a good idea for anybody that's looking to get started in their career. You know, is if you have a talent for something, if you have a passion for something, if you know how to do something, get a job where you're going to learn how to do that, where you're going to get paid to get trained. And then at some point you're going to come across some type of idea. You're going to see like what I saw. I saw this void that needed to get filled when it came to focusing on Spanish speakers, right? So at some point you're going to figure out something that can be done a little bit better or something like that, right? And then you go from there.
Well, did you have any challenges when you started your entrepreneurship?
Oh, sure. You know, when I started out, I knew I wanted to focus on teaching Spanish speakers how to speak English. But what I found was there was really no program. There wasn't a program for that. In the world of ESL, English as a second language, the dominant method for the last 50 or perhaps 100 years is something called the direct method, which advocates for teaching 100% of the time in the target language. So classes are 100% in English from day number one. Now, because of the experience I had in Spain, where I went through that program, and it was a frustrating and a humiliating experience for me. I didn't like it at all. So I've never been a fan of that method. So I didn't want to do that. But what I found was all the books that were available were 100% in English. And I tried doing that for a year or two and just, making the class, using Spanish in the classroom. But I found my students weren't able to do the homework. They would go home with the books and they would look at them and they wouldn't understand what the books were asking them to do. So I started writing and publishing my own books. At this point, I've got, I think, something like over 30 books designed to teach Spanish to English speakers and English to Spanish speakers. And I had to create the program that I wished was available when I was learning Spanish, right? Everything I've done is from my own background in learning Spanish and just thinking like, oh, it can be really fun and pleasant, or it can be humiliating and really hard, right? And I really wish that there had been a program back then to help me learn Spanish better. So I just wanted to do that for my students.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way. You use your experience, your talent, your education, and form them all into one. And so what do you enjoy most about your class, about teaching, since you El Profe or whatever? You see how bad my Spanish is, ladies and gentlemen. And so I need to take David's class. I need to be the first one in there, first one to sign up in the front of the door when he opens it.
I can help you out with that. The thing I enjoy most isn't even what happens in the classroom, but it's what happens outside of the classroom. And I'll give you a great story. Last week, coming back from the break, it was my first week back teaching after the holiday break, the first, couple of weeks of January. One of my students came back to me. She's a young lady from Mexico. She's been living here for a couple of years and feeling pretty isolated. She's got her family, and that's about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
She came back from the break and she told me, Profe, I have a job interview tomorrow at an American restaurant where she was going to only be able to speak English, right? And then she came back the next day and she said, they did my training right then and there on the spot. I got a job. The person doesn't speak Spanish. None of the customers speak Spanish. I mean, it's all in English. And none of that would have been possible 6 months ago, right? So those are, when I hear my stories, when I hear my students and their stories of how they're able to use the language they're learning to connect with people in the community, to make friends, and even more importantly, to get better jobs where they're making money that they would not have been able to make otherwise, right? That's very satisfying to me.
Yeah, I think that's very satisfying too. And I think the method, and I was going to segue to my next question, is that how you make it fun and enjoyable? How do you make your class fun and enjoyable to where kids want to learn rather than be the dreaded way I learn Spanish in class? I give you English, you give me Spanish back, to where it can be very, I'm going to say boring and not really interesting.
Sure. One thing I do want to clarify is I teach adults, so I don't actually work with children.
Okay.
But I'm working with adults. Most of my students are between the age of 18 and 45 years old. So there's a couple of things I could say about that. First and foremost, if you walk yourself backwards, right? Why do people want to learn a new language? It's so that they can talk to people, right? That's what I've always thought. That's why I wanted to learn Spanish. I didn't want to learn grammar and verb charts and fill in the blank activities on paper, right? I wanted to go and talk to my next door neighbor, right? I wanted to be able to share that experience with them. So I created my own program where I think that conversation is at the center of everything. So this is actually my classroom you can see behind me.
Oh, okay.
You can see it's really small, and that's on purpose. I never work with groups larger than 8 students at a time.
Okay.
We typically have about 4 or 5 students in our classrooms. And everything we do from the very first day is just talking, right? So we talk. I believe in talking first and then explain later. So I get my students able to introduce themselves in the first lesson. And then a few lessons later, I start explaining the grammar to them. And it's more natural that way. If you think about the way small children learn their first language, their parents aren't teaching them their language. Their parents don't get a book of grammar out and they start explaining. I don't know. Little kids are listening to their parents and then they're trying to repeat what they're hearing. Mm-hmm. And when they get the word right, like I remember my son's first word was agua in Spanish, because when he used to take a bath, I would splash the water. I would just say agua, agua, agua over and over again. And one day I could tell he was starting to repeat what I was saying, and I got excited. And then when he hit the word right, when he said agua, I gave him an applause, and like Dale Carnegie says, I was lavish in my praise and approbation, right? Like I really celebrated that. So we get our students talking, we celebrate that, and then we reinforce it with grammar later. But, you got to make it fun. You got to understand why they're doing it. And I can tell you they're doing it because they want to learn how to speak it, not because they want to learn how to read and write it. While that is important, the focus should always be on conversation.
Right.
And so that's what I've really done to try and, create that magical experience of having fun in class and making it feel like it's powerful for this.
Yeah. That's good. I like what you said there. I reiterated to David before we started the podcast that my mom was an English literature teacher and taught English. And I didn't know my mom even taught French. My mom never spoke a lick of French in front of me, David. Not a lick. I didn't find out until I was in my 20s or 30s that she even taught French. And that was by accident, seeing her resume thing. You didn't even tell me that. Oh, okay. I didn't know. And so, that is a great way to learn. My mom, even though she was an English teacher, she did not do that verb, you need to do this. Now, she did correct me, David, when I would say the subject verb agreement not right. Oh, I would get corrected, David.
Yeah.
I would get corrected knowing that my mom was an English teacher. But yeah, that's how kids learn. In fact, most teachers say that it's better for kids to start learning a second language earlier because they can absorb it more than they could as an adult when you really have to, kind of get yourself out of that you want to learn or I want to learn. And so our kids just to learn a second language more?
So that's actually a myth, I think.
That's a myth. Oh, good. Come on, that's a myth, ladies and gentlemen. Let's listen to David on this.
Yeah, it's certainly there's certainly some truth to it, right? Yes. Like little kids under the right circumstances, they don't ask why like adults do. And physiologically, they can perfect an accent. Once you're an adult, it's very hard to perfect an accent.
Oh, okay.
But adults actually have more cognitive capability and more reason and more logic. So adults can also learn better and faster than little kids can. It all depends, I think, on the word why. Okay? The word why is the most important. It doesn't matter what age you are, but you have to have the right circumstances and you have to have the right desire. When I was in high school, I didn't want to learn Spanish, and guess what? I didn't learn it,
Oh, yes.
And I've even seen it with my son. He's gone through phases, right, of being interested in learning Spanish and not being interested in learning Spanish. And when he wants to learn Spanish, he does a great job. He picks it up, man. He's a sponge. But then he also sometimes like, I don't want to do this today, and you have to want to learn the language. I don't think that matters really what, on your age or anything like that. So you have to, and little kids, like in the terms of like, for example, people that immigrate here and they have little kids that go into elementary school. Yes. They're surrounded by the language at school. They're surrounded by it with their peers and their friends at school. So they're going to learn it like no matter what, right? But I've also seen little kids that they just don't want to learn it and they don't. So I think that is actually a common myth that you have to be a child or young to learn a new language. I've had plenty of adults learn how to speak a new language pretty quickly.
Well, I'm glad you to debunk that myth there, because that may give me hope, David. That may give me hope.
Yeah, and there's a lot of research out there. You just have to look at some of the new research that's out there, and also be wary of the research you're reading, because whoever's publishing the research, they're biased. So they're making the research say what they want it to say. So it's great for little kids to learn how to speak a new language, but they have to want it themselves. And I see it a whole lot, in elementary schools. The parents are asking for the programs and pushing the kids into it, and then they never actually learn how to speak it. So the kids, the students themselves have to really want it.
Yeah, because I know here in Charlotte area, we have a lot of immersion programs, whether it's a Spanish immersion program at schools, or even schools, immersion schools. We have Japanese. I didn't know we had Japanese and other languages, and kids pretty much, because they don't ask those questions, they seem to, like with other kids, with their peers, then they're more willing to learn being with their peers. And they, I just talk to parents to get results there, because you with your peers, they learn and you want to learn too. So do you have any advice for anybody that want to learn a second language or that want to teach a second language or start a business like you have done?
Yeah, well, we should probably take those one question at a time, because those are two completely different.
Okay, let's go one question at a time.
If you want to learn how to speak a new language, I actually wrote a book called 5 Easy Steps to Speak Spanish with Confidence, and I have the same one, 5 Easy Steps to Speak English with Confidence. The first step is to really just get your thoughts out on paper, write down why you're learning a new language, write down some conversations that have to do with that why, and then start learning how to have those conversations on your own. But again, you have to have that really strong desire to learn how to speak the language, because it's going to take you some time, and it's probably going to put you through some uncomfortable situations, right? Like once you walk into that Mexican restaurant where nobody speaks English, like you're going to feel uncomfortable. Yes. You have to go through those uncomfortable moments. So that's why I say you have to really want it. You really have to want it. If you have a burning desire to learn how to speak Spanish and you're willing to do whatever it takes, you're going to do it. But if you go through that first uncomfortable situation and you're like, I'm not going to do that anymore, then, you don't have that strong enough reason. The second step is to really focus on the most basic and the most important component of the language, which is vocabulary. Vocabulary. once you get about 1,000 words of highly used or frequently used vocabulary, you should start understanding the language. And once you start understanding the language, it's going to greatly accelerate your learning. So you have to focus on highly relevant and highly frequently used vocabulary. After that, look for a conversational program. Okay. Mm-hmm. There are academic programs, there's reading programs, there's writing programs, and still to this date, there are very few conversation programs. So don't just go sign up for the closest Spanish class in your neighborhood, right? Mm-hmm. Do an interview with the school, ask them questions, ask them what kind of program it is, ask them how many students are in the classroom. If there's more than 10 students in the classroom, it's probably more geared towards reading and writing. If they're small classes, then they're probably conversation classes. And then from there, you have to try and practice it every chance you get and ultimately find a conversation partner, somebody that's going to support you on that language learning journey, somebody that's going to make you feel good. And I always say your best conversation partner is going to be a native speaker of that language. Right. That's trying to learn your native language. So if you speak English and you're trying to learn Spanish, find a native Spanish speaker that's trying to learn English. So that way you can help each other out. It becomes a mutually beneficial relationship. And the other person's also going to be empathetic because they're going to know what you're going through, right?
Yes.
So those are my 5 easy steps for speaking a new language with confidence, right? So understand your why, focus on vocabulary, find conversation classes, practice, and find a conversation partner.
Well, that is some great nuggets if our audience really want to learn another language. Now, how can they get in contact with you or buy some of your materials? Can they go to Amazon, your website, LinkedIn? How can they get in contact with you, or what website can they order some of the books that you offer?
Yeah, so my books are available on Amazon. I think you should just be able to look them up under my name, David Stevens. It's a common name, so you're going to find like 20 David Stevens out there. I checked into a hotel in Las Vegas one time, and there were 4 David Stevens. The receptionist said, "Which one are you?" I said, "The one with the nicest room."
I love that one.
But yeah, you can always find me on LinkedIn under Davido Profe. My email address is david@thelanguageschool.us. And then you can call me at 844-648-0055.
Well, I tell you what, man, it has been a great podcast interview. I have enjoyed it. I have learned, and I may be on Amazon and order some of those books where I can learn another language myself. You said it's not too late. I'm over 40, but it's not too late. So David, it's not too late, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to learn another language and speak it more proficiently than I do today.
I've got a woman that's like 75 years old studying Spanish with me, and she's having a great time with it. It's not too late.
It's never too late, ladies and gentlemen. Never too late. Thank you so much, Dave, for coming on our show today. I really appreciate it.
All right. My pleasure, Mitchell. Thanks for having me.
And I'd like to thank my viewers and listeners for joining me on another terrific episode of the Career Education Learning Center podcast, where we make your career dreams a reality. God bless.